presidential motorcade stops traffic. 50 black limousines line the street. The president himself steps out, all for a taxi driver? What incredible act of kindness could possibly deserve this level of recognition? Stay with us to witness how one man's simple decision changed everything. Don't forget to subscribe to Seeds of Goodness for more inspiring stories. The rain pummeled the city streets like angry fists, turning the asphalt into a dark mirror reflecting the blurred neon signs of downtown. Marcus Johnson gripped the steering wheel of his yellow taxi, squinting through the windshield wipers that fought a losing battle against the downpour. His shift had officially ended 20 minutes ago, but the storm had picked up so suddenly that he didn't have the heart to drop his last fare at a bus stop. Now, heading back to the depot, his thoughts drifted to his 13-year-old daughter, Alicia, and the stack of medical bills waiting on his kitchen table. 12 years in the Navy hadn't prepared him for the battle he now faced, fighting insurance companies while his daughter's heart condition worsened. The overtime he pulled driving this taxi 16 hours a day barely kept the collectors at bay. Still, Marcus held his head high. At 45, his close-cropped hair had begun to gray at the temples, but his shoulders remained squared, his posture military straight, even after hours behind the wheel. As he turned onto Jefferson Avenue, the rain briefly lightened, and that's when he saw him, an elderly man in a sodden coat, leaning heavily on a cane, seemingly stranded in front of a closed diner. Marcus slowed the taxi, observing the man's stiff posture and the way he clutched at his chest with his free hand. Something about the man's bearing struck a familiar chord. Marcus had seen that posture before, in men who'd carried invisible burdens back from war zones. Without hesitation, he pulled the taxi to the curb and rolled down the passenger window. "You need a ride somewhere, sir," Marcus called out. The elderly man turned, revealing a weathered face creased with pain. "I seem to have lost my way," he managed, his voice barely audible above the drumming rain. "My hotel should be nearby, but I can't seem to remember which direction." "Hop in," Marcus said, reaching across to push open the door. "You're soaked through." The old man hesitated. "I'm afraid I've lost my wallet as well. Must have dropped it somewhere." Marcus waved away the concern. "Don't worry about that. Let's get you out of this weather first." The man struggled into the passenger seat, his movements painful and deliberate. Once settled, he let out a long breath as if he'd been holding it for hours. "Thank you," he said, his voice stronger now. "Not many would stop these days." "I'm off the clock anyway," Marcus replied with a small smile. "I'm Marcus Johnson." James Wilson," the old man offered, extending a trembling hand. As they shook hands, Marcus noticed a metal chain around the man's neck. Dog tags, partially visible beneath his shirt collar. His suspicion confirmed, Marcus nodded toward them. "You serve?" James's expression changed subtly, a flicker of recognition passing between the two men. "Vietnam, Special Forces, originally. Then, other assignments." "Navy," Marcus responded. 12 years. Got out in 2015. James nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. The brotherhood of those who had worn the uniform transcended generations and branches of service. "Which hotel are you staying at?" Marcus asked, putting the taxi in drive. James frowned, pressing a hand to his temple. "The Commonwealth, I believe. I came for the memorial service tomorrow, for my unit." As Marcus pulled away from the curb, he glanced sideways at his passenger. The man's complexion had taken on an ashen quality, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the taxi's cool interior. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" James attempted a smile that came out as a grimace. "Just tired. And this old ticker doesn't like the excitement anymore." Marcus recognized the symptoms immediately. His father had shown the same signs before his heart attack 3 years ago. Without discussing it further, he made a sharp turn at the next intersection. "I'm taking you to St. Mary's Hospital. It's 5 minutes from here." No, James protested weakly. "I don't have insurance paperwork with me. Just need to rest." "With all due respect, sir, you're showing signs of cardiac distress. We're going to the ER." The next 45 minutes passed in a blur. Marcus helped James into the emergency room, explained the symptoms to the triage nurse, and waited while they took the elderly veteran back for evaluation. When the intake coordinator approached with forms and questions about insurance, Marcus found himself stepping forward. "He's a veteran," Marcus explained. "His paperwork isn't with him. I can cover the initial costs until that's sorted out." The coordinator looked dubious. "The initial evaluation alone could run several $100s, sir." Marcus thought of the $430 in his checking account, earmarked for Alicia's medication refill, but nodded firmly. "I understand. Please make sure he gets what he needs." 2 hours later, a doctor confirmed that James had experienced a minor cardiac event, not a full-blown heart attack, but needed observation overnight. When Marcus was finally allowed to see him, James lay in a hospital bed, looking smaller and more vulnerable than before, but with better color in his face. "You didn't have to stay," James said when Marcus entered the room. "Couldn't leave a brother in arms," Marcus replied simply. James studied him for a long moment. "You paid for this, didn't you?" Marcus shrugged. "They'll sort out your VA benefits tomorrow." "I don't have a hotel room," James admitted. "I was going to find one after the service. My plans changed at the last minute." The clock on the wall read 11:42 p.m. Marcus knew the hospital would discharge James in the morning, and the memorial service wasn't until 2 p.m. Without overthinking it, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his apartment key. "I live 10 minutes from here. Small place, but clean. I'll be working the morning shift anyway." He placed the key on the bedside table. "Address is on the keychain. Get some rest. Come by after you're discharged. I'll pick you up after the service." James stared at the key, then at Marcus, his eyes revealing a complex mixture of emotions. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Marcus thought about the question for a moment. "My daddy always said, the uniform changes, but the brotherhood doesn't. Get some rest, sir." As Marcus turned to leave, James called after him. "Your daughter, you mentioned she was sick?" Marcus paused, surprised he'd shared that detail. He must have mentioned Alicia during their wait in the ER. "Heart condition. Congenital. She's fighting, though. Toughest person I know." James nodded slowly. Children often are. Then, with a formality that seemed to belong to another era, he added, "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Your kindness won't be forgotten." Marcus nodded and slipped out of the room, unaware that his simple act of compassion had set in motion events that would change his life forever. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the city streets gleaming under the streetlights as Marcus walked back to his taxi, wondering how he would explain the missing money to Alicia's pharmacy tomorrow. He never noticed the hospital security camera capturing his departure, nor the silent figure who had been watching from the corridor, who now made an urgent phone call that would reach the highest office in the nation before dawn. By 5:30 the next morning, Marcus was back behind the wheel of his taxi, navigating the still dark streets with the practiced ease of a man who knew every pothole and shortcut in the city. He'd managed 3 hours of sleep on his neighbor's couch. Mrs. Rodriguez had 4 kids and an understanding heart, and now carried the weight of his decision in the pit of his stomach. The $430 that should have gone to Alicia's medication had been spent on a stranger. He'd have to work double shifts for the next week to make up the difference before his daughter's prescription ran out. Still, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The old veteran's eyes had stirred something in him, a recognition of shared sacrifice that transcended circumstance. Marcus knew what it was to stand on foreign soil, ready to give everything for people who would never know your name. He'd seen that same knowledge in James Wilson's weathered face. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister, Shanice. "Alicia's fever broke. She's asking for you." A weight lifted momentarily from his shoulders. He'd call them during his break, hear his daughter's voice. That would be enough to get him through the long day ahead. The morning passed in a blur of airport runs and business commuters. By noon, Marcus had made just enough to cover the gas and lease payment on the taxi for the day, with perhaps $30 to spare. 3 more days like this, and he might be able to refill Alicia's prescription. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch, but he ignored it. Food was a luxury that could wait. At 1:30 p.m., he found himself driving past St. Mary's Hospital, thoughts turning to James. The memorial service would begin in 30 minutes at the Veterans Memorial Park. Marcus wondered if the old soldier had used his apartment key, if he'd found suitable clothes for the service. Marcus had left his only decent suit hanging on the bathroom door, just in case. On impulse, he pulled into the hospital parking lot and approached the front desk. "I brought in an elderly gentleman last night, James Wilson. I wanted to make sure he was discharged all right." The receptionist typed on her keyboard, then looked up with a polite smile. "Mr. Wilson was discharged at 9:45 this morning. A car was sent for him." Marcus nodded his thanks, relieved that James had found assistance, probably from one of his veteran buddies. Back in his taxi, Marcus glanced at the time, 1:45 p.m. He still had 7 hours of his shift left, but thoughts of the memorial service nagged at him. He'd missed too many military funerals and remembrances over the years, always caught in the grind of making ends meet. "Screw it," he muttered, steering toward Veterans Memorial Park. He'd pay his respects, then put in an extra hour tonight to make up for it. The park was eerily quiet when Marcus arrived. He frowned as he walked toward the central memorial plaza. There should have been dozens of veterans gathered for a unit memorial. Instead, he found only a groundskeeper watering flower beds. "Excuse me," Marcus called. "I'm looking for a memorial service. For Vietnam veterans?" The groundskeeper shook his head. "Nothing scheduled today, sir. Had a small gathering early this morning, but that was for Desert Storm vets." Confusion washed over Marcus. Had James gotten the day wrong? Or had the cardiac event affected his memory more severely than the doctors realized? Whatever the case, Marcus couldn't shake the worry that the old veteran might be wandering confused somewhere in the city. His phone rang. An unknown number. "Mr. Johnson? This is Mercy Hospital Pharmacy. I'm calling about your daughter Alicia's prescription." Marcus's heart sank. He'd been avoiding their calls, knowing he couldn't afford the refill yet. "Yes, I know it's due. I'll have the funds by Friday." "Sir, that's not why I'm calling," the pharmacist interrupted. "Your account has been credited. The prescription is ready for pickup, and it's been paid for the next 12 months. Marcus pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at it in disbelief before returning it. "There must be a mistake." "No mistake, sir. It was processed this morning. You can pick it up any time." Marcus thanked her automatically, his mind racing. Had Shanice somehow found the money? But that was impossible. His sister was struggling to keep her own lights on. As he slid back into his taxi, his radio crackled to life. "Dispatch to Johnson. Johnson here? You've got a pickup request. 1949 Constitution Avenue." Marcus frowned. That address sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Roger that. On my way." As he drove through the city center, his thoughts remained tangled between the mysterious prescription payment, James's non-existent memorial service, and the gnawing concern for his daughter. Pulling onto Constitution Avenue, everything else fell away as realization dawned. 1949. Constitution Avenue wasn't just any address. It was the Veterans Affairs headquarters. "What the hell?" he muttered as he pulled up to the imposing building. Before he could even put the taxi in park, a suited man approached his window. "Mr. Johnson? Marcus Johnson?" Marcus nodded warily. "Would you please come with me, sir? There are some people who would like to speak with you." "I'm on the clock," Marcus replied. "I can't just—" "Your dispatcher has been notified. Please, sir. It's important." Something in the man's tone brooked no argument. With a sigh, Marcus locked his taxi and followed the suit into the building, through security and into an elevator that required a special key card. They traveled upward in silence, finally emerging into a tastefully decorated executive floor that Marcus had never imagined existed within the typically utilitarian VA offices. His escort led him to a conference room and opened the door. "Mr. Johnson is here, sir." Marcus stepped inside and froze. James Wilson sat at the head of a polished mahogany table, but not the James from last night. This James wore a perfectly tailored dark blue suit adorned with rows of military ribbons and medals that covered nearly his entire left breast. His silver hair was neatly combed, his posture ramrod straight. The frailty of the previous night was gone, replaced by an unmistakable air of authority. "Marcus." James rose, smiling warmly. "Right on time." "Sir," Marcus managed, suddenly acutely aware of his wrinkled taxi uniform and worn shoes. "I don't understand." "Please sit down. We have much to discuss." James gestured to the chair beside him. Marcus remained standing. "The memorial service. A necessary fiction, I'm afraid. Please, sit." Reluctantly, Marcus took the offered seat, noting for the first time that they weren't alone. 3 other men in dark suits sat silently along the far side of the table, watching with inscrutable expressions. "You must have questions," James said. "A few," Marcus acknowledged, fighting to keep his voice level. "Starting with who you really are." James smiled. "I am exactly who I said I was. James Wilson, Vietnam veteran. What I didn't mention was that after Vietnam, I served for 27 years in the United States Secret Service, ultimately as the Director of Presidential Security. And before that, I had the honor of saving a young congressman's life during an assassination attempt, a congressman who now occupies the Oval Office." Marcus stared, processing the implications. "Last night was entirely unplanned, I assure you. I truly was in town for a private remembrance. The cardiac episode was quite real. My doctors have been warning me about stress for years." James leaned forward. "What was also real, Marcus, was your extraordinary kindness. You had every reason to drive past an old man in the rain. Instead, you stopped. You paid for my medical care with money you needed for your daughter. You offered your home to a stranger." One of the suited men slid a folder across the table. James opened it, revealing a dossier with Marcus's photo paperclipped to the top. "Marcus Johnson, Navy Petty Officer First Class, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. Bronze Star with valor for pulling 3 Marines from a burning vehicle under enemy fire. Honorable discharge in 2015 to care for your daughter after your wife's passing." James looked up. "Since then, you've worked 16 hours a day driving a taxi, all while fighting insurance companies to cover your daughter's condition." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "You've been investigating me." "Since about 3 this morning," James confirmed. "What I discovered was a man who embodies the very best of what we claim to value in this country: duty, honor, sacrifice. Yet the country you served has left you driving a taxi to the point of exhaustion just to keep your child alive." James closed the folder. "That ends today." "Sir?" "The president is in town for a conference." When I told him about our encounter, about the quiet heroism of a taxi driver who had already given so much for his country, he insisted on meeting you. In fact, James glanced at his watch, his motorcade should be arriving within the hour. Marcus felt the room tilt slightly. "The President of the United States is coming here? To meet me?" "No," James said, rising from his chair. "We're going to meet him. But first, I believe this belongs to you." He handed Marcus an envelope. Inside was a check for $430, exactly the amount he'd spent at the hospital. "How did you—" "I have friends at St. Mary's," James said simply. "And that's just the beginning. The president has authorized the immediate activation of your VA benefits at the highest priority level, including comprehensive coverage for Alicia's condition. Additionally, the Veterans Children's Medical Fund has arranged for Alicia to be evaluated by the top pediatric cardiologists in the country next week." Marcus stared at the check, his vision blurring. "I didn't do this for rewards." "Precisely why you deserve them," James replied, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "A car is waiting to take you home to change. Your daughter and sister will meet us at the White House satellite office. And after the president's commendation, we have some further matters to discuss regarding your future employment. A man of your caliber should not be driving a taxi." As they walked toward the elevator, Marcus found his voice again. All this because I gave an old man a ride? James stopped, fixing Marcus with a penetrating gaze. No, son. All this because when America had forgotten its promises to you, you still remembered your promise to America, to serve with honor and to leave no one behind. He smiled. The uniform changes, but the brotherhood doesn't. Isn't that what your father taught you? Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with a news alert. He glanced down and froze at the headline, Presidential Motorcade Diverts, 50-vehicle convoy en route to VA headquarters. James's eyes twinkled. He brought more than I expected. The president always did have a flair for the dramatic. Marcus stood by the window of the executive conference room, watching as the motorcade arrived. One by one, the black vehicles pulled up in perfect formation. Limousines, SUVs, and police escorts, creating a secure perimeter around the VA building. The street had been cleared, but crowds were already gathering behind the hastily erected barriers, phones raised to capture whatever momentous event was unfolding. They're ready for us, James said, appearing at Marcus's side. Someone had brought a freshly pressed suit for Marcus, navy blue with a crisp white shirt. It fit perfectly, making him wonder just how thorough James's investigation had been. As they descended in the elevator, Marcus's thoughts turned to Alicia. My daughter is already on her way with your sister, James assured him. They'll meet us outside. The elevator doors opened to reveal a transformed lobby. Secret Service agents stood at attention, earpieces in place, eyes constantly scanning. A red carpet had been unfurled across the marble floor to the main entrance. James guided Marcus toward the doors just as a commotion outside signaled the president's arrival. Through the glass, Marcus could see the presidential limousine come to a stop. When the door opened, Marcus found himself holding his breath. The President of the United States emerged, waving briefly to the crowds before turning toward the building with purpose. As the doors opened, Marcus stood straighter, his naval training taking over automatically. Mr. President, James stepped forward. May I present Petty Officer First Class Marcus Johnson? The president smiled warmly, extending his hand. Marcus, the honor is mine. Marcus found his voice. Mr. President, sir, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. Your actions spoke volumes. The president gestured to the doors. But there's someone else you might want to speak with. Marcus turned to see Alicia running toward him, her face alight with joy. Behind her, Shanice followed, looking stunned by the surroundings. Daddy! Alicia launched herself into his arms. Marcus held his daughter tight, momentarily forgetting the president, the cameras, everything but the miracle of his child's laughter. When he finally looked up, he saw not just the president, but a gathering of other figures, military officers, government officials, and to his astonishment, several of his former Navy commanders. The president cleared his throat. Marcus Johnson, on behalf of a grateful nation, I want to thank you for reminding us what true service looks like. He nodded to an aide who stepped forward with a velvet box. This bronze star with valor was earned years ago. Today, we add to it the Presidential Citizens Medal for your continued embodiment of American values. Cameras flashed as the medal was pinned to Marcus's suit. Through tears, he could see Alicia beaming with pride. Additionally, the president continued, I've signed an executive order establishing the Veterans Family Care Initiative, ensuring that no service member or their family faces medical hardship alone. The first beneficiary will be Alicia Johnson. The crowd erupted in applause. Marcus felt James's hand on his shoulder. I told you your kindness wouldn't be forgotten, the old spy whispered. As Marcus stood there, surrounded by dignitaries yet holding his daughter's hand, he thought of all the nights behind the taxi wheel, all the worries about bills and medications. He thought of a rainy night and an old man who needed help. And he realized that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism weren't on battlefields, but in the quiet choices made when no one was watching. Except, as it turned out, someone had been watching after all.